Chapter 4. The Shadow on the Canvas. Every instinct in my mammalian brain screamed at me to chase that red backpack, to tear blindly through the briars, plunge into the freezing fog, and finally catch the ghost that had haunted my every waking moment for 20 years. But 15 years of search and rescue protocol, overriding primal panic, is the only reason I am still alive to record this tape. Running into the unmapped corners of the Appalachian backcountry after sunset is a highly efficient form of suicide. The geography of Blackwater Ridge is a lethal obstacle course of blind drop-offs, sudden sinkholes, and uncovered, centuries-old logging shafts. If the forest didn't get me, the gravity certainly would. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I stayed put. I backed away from the tree line, crawled inside Marcus Evans's bright orange tent, and zipped the heavy nylon door shut. If you live in a city or even a suburb, you do not actually know what darkness is. City night is a muddy gray. Suburban night is a deep blue. But out here, under a canopy of ancient hemlocks that completely block out the stars, the dark is absolute black. It has weight. It feels solid, as if you have been buried alive under a mile of cold, damp velvet. I kept my flashlight turned off to conserve the batteries. I sat cross-legged in the center of the professor's pristine sleeping bag, pulling my knees tightly to my chest. I wrapped my right hand around the cold, textured steel grip of my Glock 19. I knew, with absolute certainty, that a 9mm handgun was completely useless against whatever was out there in the trees. But human beings are fragile creatures. We need our illusions of safety just to keep our hearts beating. As I sat there in the pitch black, waiting for the clock to crawl forward, my mind drifted back to the locked filing cabinets in the basement of the search and rescue headquarters. We called them the ancestral ledgers. They were filled with heavily redacted journals dating back to the first European settlers in the 1700s, alongside old Cherokee oral histories that had been translated onto yellowed, crumbling paper. The Cherokee people did not hunt in Blackwater Ridge. They actively avoided it. In their ancient dialect, they called this specific stretch of woods the place of the hollowed voices. Their legends didn't speak of ordinary monsters. They didn't warn of giant bears or mountain lions or things with massive claws and razor-sharp teeth. They spoke of something far worse. They spoke of entities that have no true form of their own. Things that are essentially echoes without a speaker. The old settler journals described them simply as the mimics. According to the Forbidden's lore, these entities do not hunt for meat. They hunt for your mind. They possess the terrifying ability to sift through your subconscious, searching for the rawest, most agonizing memory buried in your psyche. The sudden death of a parent, the devastating loss of a child, the crushing, unresolved guilt of an older brother. They find that trauma, and they use it like a fisherman uses a writhing worm on a hook. They pull that memory out, shape it perfectly into a voice, and throw it into the dark. They feed on the hesitation. They harvest the grief. When I was a younger man, I used to read those journals and laugh. I dismissed it all as collective hysteria and campfire ghost stories. But sitting in the suffocating darkness of Marcus's tent, with Toby's spotless yellow whistle sitting heavy in my jacket pocket, I was not laughing anymore. I waited. The silence was deafening. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the atmosphere inside the tent shifted. The temperature plummeted so rapidly it felt like walking into a meat freezer. I could suddenly see my own breath in the dark, forming faint, swirling white clouds frozen in the ambient glow of my watch dial. And then, the heavy silence finally broke. It didn't start with the hollow bone whistle this time. It started with a wet, choked sob. It was small. It was painfully weak. It sounded like it was coming from a muddy ditch about 10 feet away from the thin nylon wall of my tent.
Sammy.
The voice whimpered. It was Toby. It wasn't an approximation. It wasn't a trick of the wind. It was the exact cadence, the exact pitch, the exact slight lisp of my 8-year-old brother.
Sammy, my feet hurt.
The voice cried out, trembling with the cold.
The ground is wet. Why did you leave me in the dark?
A wave of primal ancestral grief hit me so hard in the chest that I physically gagged. I almost vomited. Every single cell, every fiber of muscle in my body screamed at me to tear that tent zipper open, sprint blindly into the fog, and scream his name. My left hand actually reached out in the dark. My trembling fingers brushed against the cold metal of the zipper pull. But then, the conditioning kicked in. Search and rescue rule number 7. It is written in bold, red ink on the very first page of the classified manual. If a missing person calls out to you after midnight using a voice that has not aged, you do not respond. You do not leave the structure. You treat the sound as an environmental hazard. I pulled my hand back. I bit down on my own lower lip so hard that the skin broke. I tasted the hot metallic flavor of copper flooding my mouth, using the intense physical pain to anchor my sanity to the real world. I sat in absolute silence. I did not answer. The thing outside realized the crying wasn't working. And that is when the psychological terror truly shifted gears. The crying stopped instantly. There was no fading out, no gradual calming down. It was a hard, immediate stop, exactly like a tape recorder being paused mid-sentence. Then came the footsteps. They were not human footsteps. They were entirely too heavy, and the rhythm was fundamentally wrong. It sounded like 4 massive wooden stilts violently striking the soft pine needles. Thump, thump. It walked slowly around the perimeter of the tent, circling me the way a starving wolf circles a wounded trapped deer. I tracked the sound with the barrel of my gun, turning in a slow circle on my knees as the heavy wooden thuds moved around me. Then it stopped, right in front of the tent door. The moon must have finally broken through the dense cloud cover above the canopy, because a long, terrifying shadow was suddenly cast against the bright orange fabric of the tent door. I stared at it, my eyes wide, my breath completely trapped in my paralyzed throat. The shadow was a hand. It looked vaguely like a human hand, but the fingers were at least 18 inches long. They possessed far too many knuckles, bending and twisting at sickening angles that defied all laws of anatomy. The skeletal shadow pressed against the nylon from the outside, stretching the orange fabric inward toward my face. The pointed tip of its longest finger was only 3 inches away from my nose. And then, the hand began to move. Slowly, deliberately, the tip of that elongated, multi-knuckled finger slid down the fabric until it rested perfectly on top of the tent zipper. And from the other side of the thin, millimeter-thick nylon wall, a voice spoke. It was my own voice. The exact, deep, raspy voice I am using to talk to you right now. It whispered,
"Let me in, Samuel. We're both so tired of searching.